As we move into 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul is going to begin by warning Timothy about some things that were going to be coming in the future. The 2 Timothy chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, he says, "But realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these." So here in these verses, Paul is warning Timothy that difficult times are coming. He's warning him so he could be prepared for this. Now, he says this is going to happen in the last days. In the last days, difficult times will come. Well, when is this going to happen? When are the last days? Is it something in the future, even in our future? Or is this another period of time? For all of Paul's writings, when he wrote to Timothy, he's writing about things that were going to affect Timothy. So this would be a little bit of a jump to have something where it's applying something yet in our future, yet he's warning Timothy about it. But if you remember earlier in our study of 1 Timothy, in 1 Timothy chapter 4, he told Timothy about things that were going to happen in the latter times. That the Spirit explicitly said in chapter 4, verse 1, that in the latter times some will depart from the faith. Where he was warning him about something that was going to happen by the end of the first century, where this apostasy was going to start happening. And in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 2, it talks about Jesus being the spokesman for the last days, or in the last days. And in 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter talks about the last days, and he says that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts, and saying, "Where is the promise of his coming, the coming of Christ?" So he is talking about those who would ridicule the fact that the Lord is going to come back, saying that, well, this hasn't happened yet. And so the last days there is the time when we were awaiting the return of Christ. So we think about, well, what does Paul mean when he talks about in the last days difficult times will come? He's talking about the gospel age. Jesus is the spokesman for the last days. We are in the time that we are awaiting the Lord's return, the time when this apostasy was going to take place. So Timothy was living in those times. We are living in these times. So it's not referring to something that is yet in our future only, though it would extend to that, but it's also something that Timothy was going to face as well. So this is a very practical warning for him. And in the same way, it's a very practical warning for us. Difficult times are what we are going to face since we are living here in the last days. And he talks about some characteristics about those who are causing the trouble, those who are the reason for the difficulty. He talks about several things, and there's a long list of them here in these first few verses of 2 Timothy chapter 3. So let's go through this list that he gives of these characteristics of these troublemakers or these false teachers, the ones who are going to cause the difficulty, and see what these characteristics were that we can watch for them, because Timothy is going to be told, you need to watch for these men. Avoid such men as these, as he says at the end of verse 5. So what do these men look like, or what characteristics are true about them? Well, he first says that they will be lovers of self. They're only concerned about themselves and what they want, what they desire. They disregard God, they disregard the will of God, and what their actions might affect others. They're not concerned about any of that. They're only interested in themselves. It's this selfishness that's going to characterize these ones who are going to cause the trouble for those who are trying to follow the will of God. They are lovers of self. They are lovers of money. The King James uses the word covetous here. And Timothy was warned in the first letter, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, that the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. So these ones who have this characteristic, this love of money, they're going to cause all sorts of trouble because this is the root of all sorts of evil. So they are going to be motivated by greed. They're going to be covetous. They are going to value the things of this life, material things, material gain, over the things of God and the promises that He offers. They are boastful. They speak highly of themselves in order to elevate themselves above others. They're trying to make themselves look to be more important, which goes along with the next characteristic, that they are arrogant. They put themselves above others. John warned about an individual like this in 3 John verse 9. There was a man named Diotrephes who's mentioned in that verse in 3 John verse 9, where it says that he loves to be first among them, or he loves to have the preeminence. You have individuals who want to be seen as the leaders in the church, the ones that everything has to be done according to their will. He's not describing elders who are shepherding according to God's plan. No, he's describing those who are simply wanting everything to go according to their will rather than God's will. They want to be seen as the leaders. It is their church. That's the problem with Diotrephes. That's what he's describing here with these individuals. But these ones here that he's describing are revilers or blasphemers. That's what the Greek word means, is they are blasphemers. They're speaking evil of God. They are disrespecting His authority because, again, He is the one who is over all. He is the one that we are striving to follow. But when you have someone who is not content to serve the Lord, they are going to cause trouble for those who put the Lord first. Because those ones who put the Lord first aren't going to submit to someone like a Diotrephes or one of these false teachers that Paul is warning Timothy about. The next thing he says here is that they are disobedient to parents. The previous characteristic, they were revilers or blasphemers. They were speaking evil of God, disrespecting Him and His authority. Well, here when we see that they are disobedient to parents, well, this is the authority that God has set in place in the home. So they are disrespecting the authority of God, but also the authority that God put in place in the home. This is a violation of the instruction that Paul gave over in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, where he said, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise." So children are instructed to obey your parents. And then even after the time where they are out on their own and grown and no longer living under their parents' roof, that they are still to honor their father and mother. But these ones here, they reject all of that. They don't respect their parents. They're disobedient to their parents. They are ones who are ungrateful. They have a sense of entitlement. These characteristics all are linked together. They revile God and His authority. They disregard the authority that He has put in place in the home and are disobedient to their parents. And as we see a lot of times with these children, even today, who are disobedient to their parents, one of the problems that we see among them is that they have this sense of entitlement. They are ungrateful. They think that everything that good that happens to them is what they deserve. And so if anything happens that is not what they would want, well, it's an attack on them. That they are being disrespected because they're not getting what they think they are entitled to. But when something good happens for them, well, they're not thankful for that or grateful because they believe that that's just how it ought to be. So they are ungrateful. They are unholy. This refers to those who are wicked, those who are engaged in sinful activities. They are not set apart for God's purpose, which is what the word holy means, to be set apart. They are not set apart for God's purpose. Instead, they are pursuing their own lusts. They are unloving, or the King James Version has the phrase, without natural affection. Now, there is a sense in which love is learned, that love, as the New Testament describes it, is an action. It's about putting others first, and it's something that we train ourselves to do, something that we learn to do. But also, there is a sense in which there is a natural affection that we have for others, particularly those that we are close to. It mentions parents here. The family is a natural relationship that typically there's going to be a closer relationship and affinity for those who are part of our family. Well, these individuals here, they're without natural affection. They don't have this. So it's not just they haven't learned to practice love the way the scriptures talk about love, but they don't even have the most basic natural inclination to show love or affection to others. They are irreconcilable. King James uses the word truce breakers here. It literally means they are without treaty or covenant. You cannot get them to agree to anything. They will not compromise and work together with others. It is their way or the highway. Just as we talked about Diotrephes earlier, where he was arrogant. He wanted to have the preeminence. It was his way or nothing was going to be done. Was not going to stand for anything else to happen but what he wanted to do. That's what these individuals are. They are irreconcilable. They cannot get along with others. You cannot work with them. And then they are malicious gossips or false accusers. Now we understand the scriptures teach, it's very clear that gossip itself is wrong. But this is more than just they gossip about other people, but they do this maliciously. It's possible to be guilty of gossip against someone while thinking we have good motives, that we're trying to help them. Sometimes we convince ourselves that we are trying to help someone when we're really gossiping about them. That's not what this is. This is their gossips, but they are deliberately trying to harm people. They are malicious in their intent. They are without self-control. They follow after their own lust. The passage we read earlier in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 3. Those mockers will come in the last days following after their own lust, doing what they want to do. They've rejected God. They want to do what they desire. They are brutal or fierce. The King James uses that word. It's like a wild beast. The last point says they were without self-control. So this is related to that. They act like wild animals. They are destructive to others. They are haters of good or despisers of those that are good. It's not just that, well, they've made a choice to do one thing and someone else has made a choice to do another thing and we just live with the fact that we've made different choices. No, they are antagonistic to those who have chosen to do what is good. They are going to be against, or as he's going to talk about later in this chapter, they're going to be persecutors against those who are practicing the truth. They are treacherous or traitors, going back to the point where they're irreconcilable or they're truce breakers. They turn their back on those who previously trusted them. They go back on their word. You cannot trust these individuals. They are reckless. They are rash. They do not consider the consequences of their actions. It's like the ones Jude talked about in Jude verse 11, those who have rushed headlong into the error of Balaam. They're rash in their actions. They don't think about the consequences of their behavior, but they rush headlong into whatever direction they want to go, which is according to their own desires, because they're not exercising self-control. They are conceited or high-minded, again related to what we saw earlier about them being boastful or arrogant. But this word brings with it the idea of not only arrogance, but this high-mindedness that leads them to act in a way that is foolish, that they end up making a fool of themselves because they have such an elevated opinion about themselves that they cannot see that what they are doing is wrong and is foolish. They are lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. What they desire is more important than what the Lord desires. They want what they want and they disregard what God's will is for them. But then he says that they are holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. They make a show of being religious, but in reality they see no value in following the will of God. They make a pretense about being spiritually minded, but really they are only interested in what they want to do. So these are the ones who are causing all this trouble. In the last days, difficult times will come because you will have people who will follow after these things, who will have these characteristics. So after listing all of these things, Paul tells Timothy, avoid such men as these. You don't want to encounter them. You don't want to get caught up in them where you have trouble against you because you get too close to them. But also, this is not explicitly stated, but it is certainly implied, you do not want to become like them. These are the ones who cause trouble for God's people, which means these are the ones who have placed themselves against God. We do not want to be like these individuals.